I'm Dave Trachtenberg. Welcome to American Folk Heroes of the 20th Century. Our purpose in bringing you these documentary dramas is to take a long look at the not-too-distant past, examining characters of history and imagination who emerged as heroes of America. Folk heroes, fictional creations who assume a very real part of our lives. We are interested in folk heroes, individuals who never existed but were creations of someone's imagination. Secondly, in each case we examine the climate of the times, the existing social environment, as we call it. It is important to know when a character first appeared, what problems confronted us as a nation, what were the pressing issues of the day, what were we like at that time. We forget that every day, every month, every year, we change. It is in looking back, in remembering, in analyzing ourselves as we were, that we find the reason for the appearance of the folk hero. Each folk hero, as well, has come to us through a particular medium of communication. Storytelling was popular in the centuries prior to this one, but is fast becoming a lost art. Books are a form of communication, and countless colorful individuals have been made a part of our world through the printed page. And in the last few decades, technology has made radio, television, and motion pictures an avenue of communication as well. In this program, we present a sample of the folk hero, a dramatic highlight of the past, where we see the hero in a typical situation. It is in the development of the sample that we see all the other elements which led to the creation of the fictional character. Today we will look at not one, but 4 folk heroes who exemplify a decade of motion picture development. While each character found its creation in story and printed media, it was the transfer of this material to celluloid, the production of the motion picture, which made each one a part of our life and heritage. While critics may argue the artistic merits of the motion pictures to which we refer, no one can dispute the far-reaching effects these films had. Children and adults managed to scrape together enough change to see their wildest dreams emerge from the square screen over and over again. Join us now as we make room for a spine-chilling quartet. Come back a few years and step into the beginning of the 1930s. You may squeeze your eyes closed, you may cover your ears, just as thousands of children did decades ago. Try though you may, you can't keep these visitors from the supernatural away. This is Will Rogers, a beloved humorist, who tried to help this country laugh its way through a depression. He said, "We hold the distinction of being the only country to drive to the poorhouse in an automobile." Rogers was saying that, in the midst of a catastrophic depression, people still hung on to those habits which hardly went with hunger and unemployment. There were still automobiles, streetcars, fancy clothes, theaters, and motion pictures. But there was no bad dream from which we could awaken happily. It was really a depression. 15 million people were unemployed as 1929 became 1930. On Wall Street, there were still those whose passage to freedom was an open window. For the average American, every day was a struggle against 3 meals, the mortgage, and mounting utilities. The land of the free was drifting into a sea of darkness and despair. The realities of cold winters, months of joblessness, of doing without special treats, were somehow softened by the world of entertainment. In the late 1920s, sound had come to the movies, and during the closing years of the decade, the screen was alive with all talking, all singing musicals. Pack your troubles and dreams, dream your troubles away. It worked for a little while, and then it became all too apparent that Mr. and Mrs. America were all talked and all sung to death. The lines of dancing choreens, of dusty operettas, of muted trumpets were losing their charm. You experienced limitless happiness in the darkness of the theater, but you stepped into grim reality when you left. So Hollywood took the opposite approach. They presented a number of films so frightening and horrifying that coming back to reality was a relief and not a disappointment. The star of many of these melodramas was Lon Chaney Sr., who emerged as a talented actor and a genius of makeup in silent epics. Personal tragedy in the form of throat cancer struck this great talent, and a remake of an earlier silent, The Unholy Three, was the only sound film he ever made. It was released a few months before he died, but the message had been heard. The year that Lon Chaney died, 1931, his director, Todd Browning, released a motion picture which was to officially commence the era of the horror film. Until this production, all motion picture dramas with a supernatural plot would be rationally explained in the last few minutes of the film. What seemed to be strangely unreal was justified in the light of reason, but this was to change. Audiences of the early 1930s seemed to enjoy believing in something they would have laughed at years earlier. No attempt was made to explain the horror of the supernatural. There is an old Romanian legend about the powers of evil which lurk in the little town of Transylvania. The legend has continued for hundreds of years and was dramatically recorded in a novel by Bram Stoker. In the mid-1920s, his novel of life after death, of black magic and the powers of darkness, was transformed into a play which enjoyed a run on the Broadway stage. When Todd Browning decided, in 1931, to deal with the powers of the supernatural, he took this stage play and its star to bring to the screen a new dimension in horror.
Count Dracula.
Good evening.
The Count was actually a vampire, one of the living dead, who slept by day and roamed by night. He generally had his eyes peeled for a lovely damsel, whom he would add to his harem, buried quietly in the catacombs beneath his cathedral-like estate in Transylvania. The Count had hypnotic powers, and once his mind was made up, he would unleash his full abilities on capturing his prey. In the deepest, darkest hour of night, when all mortals slept quietly in their beds, the evil force of Count Dracula would be transformed into his alter ego, a huge vampire bat. Silently through the darkness, the bat would fly, seeking out the helpless victim. In the first Dracula motion picture, the unknowing damsel was actress Helen Chandler. Count Dracula would bring mortals under his power by biting them on the neck and draining their blood from them. Count Dracula was physically quite strong and possessed almost limitless mental powers. He, like all vampires, could only be killed by driving a stake through his heart. Or, if he were out of his coffin at daybreak, he would die. And most important, Count Dracula was powerless against the cross. It is through the cross, the sunlight, and the stake that Count Dracula is finally destroyed. Keep in mind that word destroyed. We'll come back to it a little later. A gentle, refined young woman of the 19th century who had quite a lively imagination. Her name was Mary Shelley, and she was but one member of a distinguished family of authors. In the 1800s, she created a tale of evil doings, of science and the supernatural, which shocked the literary circles of England. James Whale had read Mary Shelley's book and was creating his own horror masterpiece at the same time that Dracula was in production. The release of his film created an even greater furor than the tales of the vampire count. The story begins in a basement laboratory of a young scientist. This fledgling doctor has dreams of grandeur, of defying the laws of nature, of creating life from death. His experiments are more important than anything or anyone else on Earth.
At last, I have succeeded where others have failed. You are living, breathing proof of all my theories. I shall present you to a convocation of physicians and laugh in their faces.
Master, I am afraid.
Afraid, Igor? There's nothing to fear. You see before you the summit of scientific creation. And I, Victor Frankenstein, created him. Life from death. A living being created from dead tissue.
As the story progresses, the monster escapes into the night. Dr. Victor Frankenstein suffers a mental collapse and returns to his home for treatment. He settles down enough to plan for his marriage to a lovely girl from his hometown. What had happened to spoil the young doctor's experiments had been the transplant of a criminal brain into the monster's head. However, this seemed all in the past. The monster was a secret, which Dr. Frankenstein expected to take to his grave. Taller than any human being, with the strength of 10 men, and a mind of pure evil. There seemed at first no way to rid the earth of this creature. But it, like Count Dracula, had a weakness. Fire, the purifying element, destroyed Frankenstein's monster on the top of an old windmill. The bestial creation of man was finally consumed in the laughing flames of the villagers. And Victor Frankenstein lived to tell the tale. The producer of the classic film Frankenstein was so proud of his epic that he added an introductory message to the motion picture, which he delivered himself. While local television stations today frequently cut this opening scene in replaying the film, it is possible to see it occasionally on a late show rerun. Hollywood now turned to the classics. Not the pleasant chamber dramas of the Victorian times, mind you, but to the pseudoscience and demonic tales of Robert Louis Stevenson and Edgar Allan Poe. And audiences came to the movie houses by the thousands. The League of Nations was dying in Geneva. Japan was in Manchuria. We had a new president in the White House and a new deal throughout the nation. Either we were relaxing a little more, or we were learning to live with the hardships. In any event, Americans now faced their economic depression with a new determination. They tried hard to rebuild during the day and relaxed with the radio or newspaper in the evening. Or, if they had a little extra pocket change, they went to the movies. The 30s were the years of the gangster film, the Busby Berkeley musical, and more tales of horror. Frankenstein and Dracula were supposedly destroyed, and the public wanted more horror heroes. Hollywood willingly obliged.
Years ago, in the land of the pharaohs, lived the lovely princess Ananka. She was dedicated to serve in the temple of the gods. But she fell in love with a young soldier, Cadiz, and she plotted to run away with him. The gods are not to be dealt with so lightly. Carice and Ananka were caught. They were punished according to their crimes. Carice had his tongue cut from his mouth, so that he never again could blaspheme the gods. He and his princess were wrapped in burial garments and entombed alive. Their burial place was kept a secret. The warning on the tomb read clearly, "Beware the curse."
Naturally, the tomb was violated by a group of intrepid explorers or archaeologists, who not only uncovered the wealth of the burial place, but an ancient scroll. By burning a number of tanner leaves, a surprising effect can take place among the undead. Carice the mummy was repeatedly brought back to life by devout followers who knew of the tanner leaf formula. Strong like the Frankenstein monster, he frightened countless mortals during his search for his lost love, the princess Ananka. Depending on which version you saw, Carice was burned, drowned, and also disintegrated. Material for movie scripts was also found in the legendary study of lycanthropy, the science of werewolves. Here, Hollywood played on superstition and legend to create another of its horror heroes.
So hear these words and listen well. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers at night will become a werewolf. When the wolfbane blooms and the moon is full, keep watch. I caution you. Keep watch for your very lives.
In the original film, Henry Hull, a talented actor, played the doomed Lawrence Talbot. But it was in the succeeding versions, where the son of the acting genius Lon Chaney played the dual role, that the werewolf became a popular horror hero. Poor Talbot. Accidentally infected, he became the victim of the full moon. The werewolf, or wolf man, whichever you prefer, also died at the end, or rather appeared to die. By the end of the 1930s, Hollywood had run out of new ideas, and the younger generation was still clamoring for more. In the early 40s, we saw a series of films whose titles began The Return of, or The Son of, and the old familiar faces reappeared. The supposed deaths were explained away in a few moments of swift script writing. By the time World War II was over, these horror heroes had just about played themselves out. In a desperate attempt to continue their popularity, 2 or even 3 horror heroes were teamed in one film. But it wasn't the same. We had done some growing up, and the old ghosts and goblins weren't frightening anymore. Thank you for joining us for American Folk Heroes of the 20th Century. If you've enjoyed our show, we're always happy to hear from you. This is David Trachtenberg, inviting you to be with us again. Take care now.
How many of your friends have their own TV show? You can. Each week, these kids come to Cinekyd in Willow Grove to produce their own television show. You can join them. Work the cameras, create the effects, or even land a role in our TV series Phantomos. Cinekyd Theater is seen by thousands of people in your area. Be a part of the experience. Be a part of Cinekyd. Call 659-4696 and you can be a star.